Can Europe achieve growth while having countries within it with huge public debt? Is Greece's debt manageable? Let's see what Mr. Pikkety has to state, an economist and professor at Paris School of Economics. From the European Parliament, for Actua TV, Chara Ghioka. Mr. Pikkety, can Europe achieve growth substantially, meaning both social and economic benefits, while within it there are countries with huge public debt, such as Greece?
Well, I think there are several problems. First, if we want to achieve growth in the long run, we need to invest in innovation, in education. So if we keep for many decades, repaying in interest payment much more than what we invest in higher education in the future, then probably that's not too good for growth. The other problem is that I think there's a lack of confidence right now in the Eurozone, basically because it's very difficult in the long run to have a single currency with 18 different public debt, 18 different interest rates, 18 different tax systems in competition with one another. So this creates a lot of uncertainty. I think this will be even worse, of course, if one country was to go out. I think this will exacerbate the lack of confidence in the system. So we have this need to solve these two problems, investing in higher education, investing in the future, and building more confidence into our basic Eurozone institutions if we want to have growth in the long term.
What seems to happen is Europe to invest more, at least for the moment, than it gets back. An example is the digital agenda. Like, for example, Europe investing almost 3% of GDP and takes back 1.5. How can we achieve at least a balance or have growth in the long term? In which ways for the future?
Well, we have to do, real investment strategy, not just a fake investment strategy where we put money that was already there and we pretend that it's new investment, which is too often what we do in Europe. So let me take an example. We all like a lot Erasmus program, but what's the annual budget of Erasmus for the entire European Union? This is just a little more than 2 billion euro per year, as compared to 200 billion euro for the total interest payment that we are paying to ourselves for the public debt. So, I'm not saying that Erasmus should be increased directly to 200, although, why not spend more for higher education than for our interest payment? But it's important to realize that in Europe, we talk a lot about the future, about the knowledge economy, the information society, about investment in the future, but we don't do very much. So I think it's time to reverse this and to remember that if we were able to grow in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, this is by investing in public infrastructure, investing in public education. It's also important to remember, because memory and historical memory is important for the European construction, that the large public debt that we had after World War II were basically reduced to zero very fast through a combination of debt restructuring, inflation, and this is what made it possible for European countries, including for Germany, to invest in growth in the 1950s, 1960s. So it's a bit ironical that today Germany or France or other countries are explaining to Greece or to Southern Europe that you have to repay the debt until the last euro with zero inflation, no debt cancellation, which is not at all what happened with Germany after World War II.
Yeah, regarding that situation, like for example Greece, that has a huge public debt. How can it be manageable? Which economic factors can we use to make that debt manageable?
I think it's a combination of factors, but first it's important to realize that we've already seen public debt even bigger than this in the past. So we see, when you look at the history of public debt, we see examples with countries that have more than 200% of GDP in public debt, like Britain in the 19th century, or Germany or France in 1945, you had more than 200% of GDP. Now, if you want to reduce that kind of public debt only through conventional policy, basically budget surplus and zero inflation, it takes decades and decades and decades. This is what Britain did in the 19th century, and this is just too long. So what happened, for instance, with Germany and with France after World War II was a combination of inflation and cancellation of debt. And I think in the case of Greece, there will be some debt restructuring, some haircut, as sometimes economists or financial analysts say. But in order to make this acceptable for other countries, I think there will also be some debt restructuring for other countries as well. So I think it's important to realize that the official plan will not happen. The official plan is that a country like Greece is supposed to repay 4% of GDP in primary surplus for the next 20 or 30 years. And this is the same for Italy, for Portugal. They are supposed to repay huge primary budget surplus for the next 20 or 30 years. This will not happen. This will be a terrible mistake because this is not the right way to invest in the future. So I think it's important to prepare ourselves for this, to have the discussion. I think at some point we will have to put this debt together into a common redemption fund for all Eurozone public debt. There was a proposal that was made, in fact, by German economic experts at the end of 2011 to put together all Eurozone public debt above 60% of GDP into a common redemption fund. I think this will come back. And then there will be a combination of budget surplus, but not enormous budget surplus, a little bit more inflation. Now, I think if we had this common redemption fund with a common interest rate, it will be much easier for the European Central Bank to set an inflation target of at least 2%, and I think possibly a little more, but 0% inflation, this is too small. This makes it almost impossible to reduce such a large public debt. And finally, there will be some debt cancellation and debt restructuring.
Do you believe that Greece is walking on a thin line to exit the Eurozone?
Oh, I think it will be a catastrophe. I think people who are playing with this in Germany or in Brussels or in Paris are not responsible people. You know, I think if this was to happen, this will create even more uncertainty about the future of the Eurozone than there is already. So this will be, I think, the beginning of the end for the Eurozone. There will be other panic at every election in Portugal or in other countries. People will ask, okay, is this country going to exit?
What you're describing is most like a domino phenomenon. One country exits. And while having in mind that the United Kingdom now is considering if it's good to be in Euro or no.
Well, the United Kingdom doesn't want to enter the Euro. They just want to be in a free trade and free capital flows area. Greece is a different case, which is that Greece is already in the monetary union, and what's important is to keep the monetary union together and to bring a more democratic and political union to the Eurozone.
Can I have a final comment from you? Greece's government tried to negotiate the past few months to achieve an honorable compromise, more flexible and not that much tied to austerity. Yet, within this week, it seems that it's going to sign a deal that more or less is the same with the memorandum that we already know. Can I have a comment from you on that?
Well, we don't know what they are going to sign. You know, I think the main problem is the lack of transparency and the lack of democracy. You know, the problem is that you don't have public discussion in the Eurogroup summit. So, in fact, we don't really know what they are discussing. And I think it's important to have, at some point and as soon as possible, a Eurozone parliamentary chamber where we can have this kind of discussion with Greece and Germany and France in a public, open manner, so that we know what we are talking about. Because, you know, we are talking about reforms, but, you know, it's not precise at all. We don't know what we are talking about, and I am convinced that with more democracy, with more open public discussion, we would have reached a better agreement, and we would have reached a much earlier agreement. We've lost a lot of time because of this very bad and very opaque governance system.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.